Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Judgment Day. I'm Lorne. And of course, in this webcast podcast, I go over all the important rulings that have taken place in the last week or so from the courts across the country, the rulings we're waiting for that are in the courts, or even lawsuits that are about to be filed. And today, we're even going to talk about a lawsuit that is being threatened to be filed because it's very important given the climate we're in right now. Yeah, I'm going back to the issues surrounding the pandemic. They are getting into the courts and from right across this country, and a lawsuit being threatened here in Ontario dealing with vaccines. And of course, this all has to do with the fact, and we're all living through this, the delay between the first and second doses of vaccines here in Canada. And you may remember back early, I guess it's early March, when the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, that's a national advisory committee supposedly made up of experts in the field of pediatrics, infectious diseases, immunology, came out with the recommendation that we can wait between the doses. And a lot of people worried about that, worried because that's not what the vaccine manufacturers are saying. Indeed, Pfizer, right on their box, if I understand it, says that you should get the dose, or you must get the dose within 21 days. And so, two people here in Ontario are threatening a legal action. Uh, and we want to find out a little bit about this. Fascinating what this legal action would be and what is being contemplated. And so, let me bring in the lawyer that's acting for the two people here in Ontario. Ian Cooper from Cooper Media Law is going to join me. And Ian, there you are. And welcome to Judgment Day.
Thanks, Lauren. Nice to be here.
All right. So when we say threatening lawsuit, uh, the litigator in me understands that what we're talking about is what we call a demand letter, correct?
Yes.
All right. And you've sent it, just so we're clear, have you sent it to the feds? Is it the provincial government? Who did you put on notice?
So the PHAC, Public Health Agency of Canada, the Federal and Provincial Ministers of Health, and the chair of NACI.
Okay. And let's talk about the reasoning behind it. As I said, and I may have simplified it, when we're dealing with Pfizer, for example, as I understand it, the manufacturer, the company says the second dose should be or must be, I don't even know what the language is, 21 days. Is that what
Yeah.
it's?
So I mean, the vaccines went through obviously an approval process and clinical trials to get there. And that's what came out on the other end is 21 days for Pfizer, 28 days for Moderna. There have been some views that first doses fast would be a better strategy, and giving more people partial immunity would be better than giving everybody, who gets the vaccine
Right.
close to perfect immunity. Now, there was a study done recently, the CDC released, that I believe was working age healthcare workers. It was working age people, I believe, in a healthcare context. And it determined that the first shot conferred 80% protection.
Right.
Two comments to that. One is these were working age people, not elderly, not immunocompromised people. And second of all, it's not clear whether or not the protection waned and what the impact was on the second shot, and
Right.
whether the second shot might then necessitate down the road a third shot.
Right.
So the situation is, I kind of view this as there are three baskets of people. There are young, healthy people who give their informed consent to receive a vaccine, knowing that there will be a delay between shots. To me, that's pretty straightforward. It's defensible as a public policy to do this. It may not work. Some scientists think it'll give rise to new and interesting vaccine resistant variants, but it may not, and it may confer more protection to a wider group of people. Fair enough. For elderly people and immunocompromised people, the data seem to be pointing towards they do not get the same antibody response.
Right.
Antibody production is a relevant metric for determining vaccine efficacy. It's what the manufacturers look at in early clinical trials. I believe Merck actually, if I recall correctly, paused their vaccine over insufficient antibody production. But again, that second group, though it may be bad public policy, is arguably, if they give their informed consent and they know what they're getting into, the government is
Right.
again open to making bad policy decisions. The group in which my clients are sitting are people who went to the hospital, the vaccination site, received a consent form that said, I consent to receive this vaccine. I confirm that I have either read or had read to me the vaccine information sheet from the province of Ontario. The vaccine information sheet says in three separate places, you will come back here in 21 days for Pfizer, 28 days for Moderna to get your booster shot. My clients, and they're not alone in this, I'm
They
getting
relied on that, I take it.
a
Yes.
lot of outreach. They relied on that, but more than that, at the vaccination site, they said, look, we're hearing noises about supply issues, we're hearing all these problems. Is our vaccine appointment firm? At the vaccination site, they were told, absolutely, you have a firm date. 3 weeks from now, this is your date. Um, what happened next was the portal for the province opened up, and that was on March 15th, and they learned that their appointment was canceled. This happened to a lot of people. Some people, including my clients, still don't have a rescheduled date. So, what we're saying is we have a small group of people who made a decision to get this vaccine on the basis that they had an assurance that they would in fact be receiving their booster.
And then they
And
find out they're not. Yeah.
yeah, and when the rug was pulled out from under them, unambiguously, their consent is negated. And
Right.
what follows from that is very simple, which is an obligation of the province or the federal government, if it needs to provide guidance, or NACI, to simply say, and NACI does in its guidance, incidentally, note that where there were people who had consented prior to this change of guidance, that special considerations might apply.
All right. So you've sent the demand letter,
Yes.
and I've sent demand letters. I've received demand letters on behalf of clients. This seems urgent. So
Yeah.
my question, Ian, is why don't you just bring the action and try to get in a court immediately and get injunctive relief? Get a court to say your clients are of that third class, as you said, who relied on what they were told at that moment in time. And because I suspect, I could be wrong, you're not going to get a response.
Yeah, and I think we are in that area where we've generated a lot of publicity. We've got a lot of people who are, what I've told everybody is, write to your MP and your MPP. Let them know if you've been affected by this, or if your family or friends have been affected, that this issue matters to you. And most importantly, because governments are very good, this is the beauty of our federalist system, uh, blaming each other. Oh, it's the federal government's
Right.
fault, they didn't get enough. Oh, it's the province's fault, they're awash in vaccine and they're not administering it. Oh, it's NACI's advising us, and they kick this football around. So the important message that I've given to everybody is, let everybody who's involved in this decision know that we don't actually care about separation of powers as
Right.
voters. What we care about is that you guys do your job and figure this out. We've given that time to percolate. It's only been, I sent my demand letter on Monday. The Post piece came out on Wednesday. This week, if we don't have any movement, then we'll need to sit down with my clients and say, what do you guys want to do, either individually or as a group or class proceeding, to advance this? Because you're 100% right. We're sitting on a ticking clock.
You are sitting on a ticking clock. Here's the other problem I see. And when you look at other judgments that have taken place over the last year, pandemic related, where people have gone to court, it happened in the family law context, it's happened in the business context. The courts are deferring back to the government back to the experts. And you've got this organization or this committee called the National Advisory Committee. There's supposedly a committee of experts. And you're going to need, I would think, and maybe you're on this already, you're going to need somebody from Pfizer, somebody saying, no, they're wrong. They're wrong what they're doing if a court is even going to look at this,
Yeah.
and not defer back to government.
Yeah, no, and definitely, look, I mean, we can quibble over, candidly, uh, NACI tends to be among the medical doctors on that, the working group,
Right.
tends to be weighted towards pediatricians for obvious reasons. Most of vaccine hesitancy or the anti-vax movement really focuses on parents who don't want to give vaccines to their kids. Now, I don't intend for a moment to say, we're going to question that. That is a public policy conversation,
Sure.
but that's not an argument to be made in a court. Ultimately, what the issue here is that the government is not following its own guidance. So the government announced after the fact, after making repeated representations to people as to what would happen, a prospective change. NACI itself acknowledged the consent issue in its guidance. And
Yeah.
indeed, even in the announcement, the province said, we're going to start doing this commencing March 10th. So anybody who was vaccinated before that period of time is simply outside of that rule. And so the only question is at this stage whether or not a court is going to say, we are going to hold the government to perform duties that it took on itself
Yeah.
and to apply its own rules.
Yeah, yeah, that'll be really interesting. I mean, one thing is clear. I mean, there is one fact, and we deal in facts as lawyers. Canada is the only country in the world right now to mandate a gap of 4 months between those doses. And I won't be surprised, Ian, if once you're whatever you're doing right now, and if you end up getting into a court on an expedited basis, we're going to see more of this. And the question will be, of course, from a timing point of view. Will a court deal with this on an expeditious basis? Will they actually tell the government, not just because your clients are in that very, and I'm glad you explained the different groups, because they were there before the edict came down, if I can call it that, from the government. So they believe they went there before that, but it'll be interesting to see what your case, sort of that ball rolling down the hill, if it causes more actions to begin.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is an issue of, to me, what it boils down to is government is going to get a high degree of deference given what they're dealing with,
Oh yeah.
and they always do.
Right.
But the issue is we've moved the goalposts on individual liberties in ways that were kind of unimaginable 18 months ago as a result of this pandemic. And so for a court to say, yeah, but stuff happens, and we're just going to ignore what is a very small group of people when the balance of convenience, particularly when in Toronto, we're not even going through all of our doses. Some doses are getting junked if they've been thawed out. The mayor has come out and said not enough people are signing up, come
Yeah.
out. I mean, as a policy matter, I can tell you that a lot of seniors I talk to are saying, you know what? I'm stuck in my house. I don't like this strategy. I don't like what I'm reading about how my group, fine if you're young and healthy, this might work for you. But I'll wait until the summer when the US is done. I mean, in the States, they're vaccinating. I talked to a friend today in Connecticut whose 16-year-old is getting
Right.
vaccinated
I know
today.
it's
So
not even comparable. It's not
once they're
comparable.
done
Yeah.
vaccinating the kids, and then we have more supply here, people will be more, I think, reluctant, more willing to follow the guidance.
Well, I'm going to follow it closely, and I'm going to wait to see when that claim is issued, and when the injunctive relief will be there, because I think you'll have 100% a basis to get into court as quickly as possible. If you do, take it to the next step. And maybe you're right. Maybe the government will look at that demand letter and say, you know what, we don't want to have to deal with this. Let's do it. Or maybe they'll look at their supply chain and say, you know what, we're okay. We can make the
I'll,
doses a lot closer.
I'll give you an optimistic note, Lorne. Maybe, you know what, these people have a point and we should do the right thing
Wow.
as
Wow,
elected
look at that.
officials.
Yeah. Look at that. Now
So,
that would be a legal precedent, as we
yeah,
call it here, Ian. You send a demand letter to a government official who goes, Mr. Cooper is correct.
yeah,
We've got to do the right thing.
you've got to sometimes, especially in these difficult times and around the holidays, hope for the best and goodwill in people.
Okay, well, we'll see, and we'll keep an eye on this, and please let me know if and when you do issue the claim, because I will read it with great interest. And I thank you for joining me today, Ian.
Thanks for having me here, Lauren.
All right, Ian Cooper from Cooper Media Law, and really interesting, as you can see. And his clients, as he was saying, in a different position than everybody else who's going to get the Pfizer vaccine or Moderna right now. Because if you go right now, you heard Ian talking about the words informed consent and understanding that concept. If you go to get the vaccine at this moment in time, you already know now about the 4-month gap in doses. And so an argument could be that, well, there's others. You could do what yours truly did and get the AstraZeneca, which has a different timeline between doses. But in Ian's clients are interesting because there's a huge group of people out there who went not knowing that timeline would ever be changed, and whether or not now the government would be on the hook. And you saw us talking about the sort of tongue in cheek that the government would react to a demand letter like that. But governments, well, certainly it would be interesting if they do. I don't think they will. I think the government is literally pushing ahead right now. They're just hoping that they get enough doses, they get enough vaccines here in Canada that they can come out and go, oh, look at that. We've shortened the time period now, but we'll have to wait and see. And it's so interesting when a couple of weeks ago when we started doing Judgment Day, and I said, well, let's look at the judgments that have taken place over the last year with respect to the pandemic. And there are just it's continuing. As I said, cases are going into court, cases are coming out, and they are, I guess I can call it, pandemic related. I'll give you an example. Just not only talking about the vaccine issue, out in BC, we're getting now cases dealing with masks. The people who don't want to wear masks, and somebody out in BC decided that they'd go to the BC Human Rights Tribunal to try to file a complaint because they were told they had to wear a mask in a store. And what I was so pleased to see is that tribunal came out in what they called a screening decision. And they said, no, we're not even going to look at your complaint because, and they're dealing with, I can tell you, not just in BC, right across the country, the various human rights tribunals are dealing with all of these complaints from people who were said, well, people are forcing me to wear masks. It's my right not to wear a mask. No, well, I'll get to that in a moment. But in this particular case, the BC Human Rights Tribunal said, no, we're not even going to look at this complaint. They basically said, look, we don't, the code out there, the human rights code out there, doesn't just protect people who don't want to do something because of a personal preference. This has nothing to do. That's not what human rights codes should be about. It's not somebody who said, "Well, I don't want to do this because I don't believe in wearing a mask," and because I don't think I have to do this. And the decision, I read the decision. It's not a long decision, but what the tribunal member wrote, that this person that's referred to as a customer said that her health conditions are private, and that she doesn't have to say why she doesn't want to wear a mask. And but it's just a personal preference. And this is, I was so happy to see this, and I'll tell you why. It even goes beyond this issue of masks. It's very frustrating when people argue about their right to do something. And everybody has that right. You have your right to personal autonomy, 100%. You want to smoke? You can smoke. You can do that. But you don't have a right to exercise your rights if it could affect me or anybody else. That's where the line gets crossed. So if somebody wants to, unfortunately, smoke, I was a big smoker one day. I know what it's like to be an addict. But if somebody wants to do that and they do that in the privacy of their own home or wherever they are, and they're just doing that and they're the only ones being affected, they have that right. Yes, you do. But not to potentially affect someone else. And that's what masking is about, isn't it? It's not about your right, whether you want to wear a mask or not, or should wear a mask. It's that if you don't wear a mask, you could affect someone else. Anyway, the issue with these rights, always it seems to end up in these human rights tribunals, and it's very, very good judgment here by the BC Human Rights Tribunal coming out and saying no. We're not even going to look at this case. And by the way, just to show you again, I'll give you one more case that came out this past week, sort of to wrap the bow again around these pandemic or COVID related cases. A murder trial. Yeah, a murder trial out in Alberta. The issue of a mask came up. And this is really interesting because I was talking recently about Zoom hearings, the difference between being in court and actually examining witnesses or making submissions as opposed to doing what I'm doing right now. And one of the interesting things that comes out in a hearing is when you get a witness and you get them on full screen, and whether they are uh, uh, you can actually see them a lot better than you do sometimes in a courtroom. Well, if you are in a courtroom, one of the many uh, issues that arises in a trial is an accused or a witness's credibility, and you want to be able to see their face and see what they're like. Well, there was an accused in a murder trial in Alberta who wanted to wear his mask, and said, no, I'm going to wear my mask throughout the trial. And the judge in that case said no, wouldn't let him do it. And he came out with his written ruling, and the accused argued, I want to wear a mask. Everybody's wearing masks. I want to wear a mask, and he had been ordered to remove his mask so the jury could see his face. And his lawyer argued that his charter rights were being breached by doing so. And the judge, in his ruling, said no, that it's important that the jury be able to see his face. And he said, I did raise with the lawyer the fact that the circumstances of him not wearing a mask are entirely fortuitous, and I interpreted the response to be that nothing should be changed, that we're in a COVID, that his client should be able to do that. And he said no. He said that at the end of it, that in exercising his discretion to remove his mask, I'm not compelling him to participate in his own prosecution. I just want him to be there without a mask on so the jury can see him that way. So there you go. One person who didn't want to wear a mask, and one person in another courtroom who wanted to wear a mask, and two different decisions. I think until this pandemic, if and when it ends, we're going to be seeing more and more decisions that cases that may go into court, as we see with Mr. Cooper's clients and dealing with the vaccine and the length of time between the doses, or other cases dealing with human rights cases, dealing with masking and etc. We're going to see some more. I think we're going to be seeing, by the way, a lot of employment law cases as the weeks and months go on. with respect to issues that had happened to different employees through the last year, dealing with all of the concerns of the businesses shutting down or forced to shut down, et cetera. So I think even when the pandemic is over, they'll be that. But certainly we will, of course, keep an eye on all of them. And I will be keeping a close eye on this vaccine related issue between doses. And I am not going to be surprised at all if we see a lot more litigation coming up now that Ian Cooper has sort of started this ball rolling. There's a lot of people, as you know, very, very upset about this. And I think it's going to make its way into court. And we're going to see what you heard me call injunctive proceedings getting in there really quickly, trying to get judges to order the government to do things. Very, very hard to do in these cases. All right, look at that. Check the time. Time is up for this edition of Judgment Day. Thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully I will be back here again next week to talk about the interesting judgments, rulings that have come out, and of course, cases going into court. And yes, I can tell you, we will be expanding beyond pandemic-related lawsuits or potential lawsuits. But like I say, that's the world we're living in right now. I'm Lorne Honickman. Thanks for joining me. Talk to you again.